we've been doing this series, or we're in the middle of the series. We're calling it Thin Places. And I'm starting each of the messages by just inviting anybody who's had some sort of a thin place experience just to share anything that they might have had. And so we took a little break last week, didn't we? And Carly shared such great stuff about what's happening with our youth. And, it seemed like a long couple of weeks because we've had the big funeral and all of that's happened in the meantime. But a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about reimagining prayer. So is there anybody with any thin placey sort of thing that you'd like to share? I'm happy to move on. But yeah, we just want to give breath and air to the things that God might be meeting us in. So anybody got anything they want to share? I know some things are happening because people tell me about them, and even in our home group on Tuesday night, there was sort of, kind of this happened and that happened. So any gone. That's okay. I was Conrad and Isa. Some of you will know Conrad and Isa, and probably most of us know. They're walking the Camino in Spain at the moment, and they sent us a home group message just this week saying they're listening to the Thin Places series, and it's really touching them at the time that they're in this pilgrimage. So Conrad and Isa, I should have mentioned you before when I was talking to the Facebook Live community. Hopefully, I think this week you walk into Santiago de Compostela, and bless you in your journey, because I think it's a really significant thing I'm sure that God is doing in your life. So yes, welcome to part 5 of Thin Places. It's a series where we're looking for where the presence of God might be closer to us. It's only the way that we identify it, because God is close all the time, of course, but closer to us perhaps than in other places. And as we've said in this series, where heaven meets earth, looking for those opportunities to connect with God. We're calling it thin places as opposed to thick places, and recognizing that a lot of our life is spent in places that are actually quite thick. Thick in the sense of maybe our busyness, thick in the sense of maybe, the great things that we do in life. We're not sort of down on anything in a sense in talking about the series, but thick in those sorts of senses so we're looking for places where things thin down so we can be aware and in contact with the presence of God. And, each week I sort of hand out some resources maybe that could be useful in that process, and I'll do the same again. So it's anything that we say on Sunday is really a prompt to our exploration experience with God over and during the week. Today I want to talk about hitting the wall, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, I guess, to a Thin Places message. Sort of hitting the wall sounds like a thick thing. But it's in these times that I've experienced, I'm sure that some of us will have experienced, some of the most exciting thin place possibilities as we walk through them with God. And so I guess the message will be about, when we hit the wall, we'll talk about what the wall is, when we hit the wall is actually doing it with God. And I think that's a really important thing for us to be aware of. I was taken back this week, and I've got to feel like it was sort of God prompting me in terms of this message. I was taken back this week to the worst year I ever had pastoring. So I've been pastoring for a long time. So the worst year I ever had pastoring was in 2001. So again, that's a long time, and a long time ago, and into the start of 2002. And I can identify a few things around it, but it was like that year was dark. I was sort of 8 years into pastoring, and I just knew I wasn't very good at it, and I just had this sort of sinking feeling that I should be doing something else with my life, or actually I knew what I wanted to do else with my life, and God didn't seem to be giving me the permission to go and do it. And so sort of every Sunday was a slog, and every kind of prayer didn't sort of work or anything like that. And so I'm sort of taken back to that. I was thinking about it even this week as I was driving to home group. And one of the things that was really significant to me that year was that I was in a home group that I really went to deliberately. It's sort of, I'll look back and call that a wall experience. But I also look back sort of by good luck or whatever it was, I actually walked through that with some people who probably didn't even really know how dark it was for me, but helped me and took me through that process. And here, as I reflect back on it over 20 years later, it's like there's something about it that I know that I got shaped and formed in that year in a way that I wouldn't have if I hadn't gone through it. And you have to go through it because it does happen. The researchers Janet Hagberg and Robert Gulick, and we'll hear a little bit for them. They wrote this incredibly important book called The Critical Journey, Stages in the Life of Faith. They describe this time of being a place where a new layer of transformation occurs. They talk about a mystery that ultimately defies explanation but includes discomfort. And there's this process that God will take us through, I think, that we can be confident about in the context of our Thin Places series, but that will include discomfort, surrender, healing, awareness, forgiveness, acceptance, love, closeness to God, discernment, melting, molding, and solitude and reflection. That God will take us through these very difficult times. And I mean, I know of some of your difficult times even now, right now. And I'm sure I don't know of a whole lot of them as well, and vice versa. But the promise of God is to take us through them, and we can identify that. So it may be a faith crisis. We have faith crises sometime. It might be a life change. Something significant happens. It may even be you just wake up one day and you don't quite know who you are anymore, or you don't quite know what you believe anymore. Has that ever happened to you? That happens. That happens. We can name it. How do we work our way through that? The only thing certain is that it's going to happen. The only thing certain is that if it hasn't happened so far, it will happen to us somewhere along the way. And sort of the PS to that is it's a great opportunity to draw close to God, those very difficult times that we go. So we're not making light of it. We're not saying that it should be easy and we'll all celebrate these hard things that happen. But it's a great opportunity to connect with God. I see this in the scriptures. I mean, I've been thinking about a whole lot of biblical characters during this week, and I'm thinking, I can't really think of a biblical character who didn't hit a wall at some stage, who at some stage wasn't, kind of down on their face and crying out to God or in rebellion to God or whatever it was. I thought about the children of Israel, sort of when you're under bondage in Egypt, that's got to be a wall, in terms of your faith. Even when you're at the Red Sea and the Egyptian army, that's got to be a wall along the way. I think of Peter, sort of as he denies Jesus just after he said that he will never leave or forsake. And that's kind of a wall. He's kind of hitting a wall, and yet being restored on the beach, and sort of being the rock on which I build my church. I think about Gideon, the timid. Kind of he couldn't go into battle. I think about David, the youth. He was way too young to do any of those things. I think about Thomas, the doubter. I think about Mary, the teenage mother. I think about Lydia, the unlikely first convert in Europe. And many of their great thin place moments come through their wall experiences when they hit hard times, when they hit difficult times. Even Jesus, well, I guess not even Jesus, but Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Jesus' life and faith were growing in some way. I don't exactly know how that works, but we sort of see Jesus' life, don't we? Sort of particularly in the 3 years of his ministry through to his crucifixion. And he's always growing and developing along the way. So that seems to be something really significant. So Hagberg and Gulick in their sort of research identify what they call sort of 6 stages of faith and what it means. And I don't have time to go through it in depth, but just you might recognize some of these. They talk about that time of recognizing God. It's like a conversion time, if you like. We recognize God and we discover God. And then we begin to live and grow as disciples. We start to learn about God. And then there's a productivity that comes into our life because we're working for God, because why wouldn't you want to do that? But there are other stages that they feel or they identify in people's growth and development with God. It's a journey inward and a rediscovering in that places of God, and a journey outward of surrendering to God, and a life, what they call a life of love, where they begin to actually reflect God. And so there's this journey that's going on. And so Spiritual Growth Ministries, which my wife is the national leader of their formation program, do a fair bit of work with this in their training of spiritual directors. And they work with this idea, particularly between those stages 3 and 4. Because people will often hit a wall after, kind of a certain period of time when they've been serving and active and giving themselves to God in faith. And there's almost inevitably a moment where we ask a question and we say, why am I doing this again? what is it all about? Why, what is the reward for those things? And so they talk a lot about the wall, but there's actually walls between any of those stages and walls within other things. They're stages, they're progressions that God takes us from through to, kind of, I guess, to the end of our lives in a sense. And rather than them being, well, that was, I used to be like that and then I abandoned it because something better, they're a progression that we have. And so they're a bit like Russian dolls nestled in to one another. And so that they're part of our life that's expanding and looking. So all through history, people have studied and thought about faith and life, and they've come to these similar conclusions in this place. So Clement of Alexandria, who was one of the early church fathers and mothers, one of the early church fathers, he wrote in the 2nd century of the transitions, and this is what he said. He said, people go from paganism, so without God, to faith. That's the conversion. That's sort of stage one. They go from faith to knowledge because they begin to learn about God, and they go from knowledge to love. So there's this progression that they do, so that they don't just stay at knowledge, but they actually progress out from there. John Bunyan, who you might have heard, he wrote a famous book in the 17th century called Pilgrim's Progress, and he describes a journey of faith as a travelling adventure through many different types of terrain, including places of danger and risk, and sometimes places of calm and safety. And so I think we would identify with some of those, ebbings and flowings of the life journey. Walter Brueggemann, coming into the 21st century, Old Testament scholar, talks about God's deliberate work in our lives to take us from orientation to disorientation to new orientation. So what does that mean? It's like our orientation's like, well, I'm really settled in my faith. I know God, I know and I understand who God is and what he's doing, until you don't. Until a life event happens or a crisis occurs, or, somebody that you really respect doesn't, kind of act like a Christian that you thought they were, or something, kind of you'll fill in the blank. You've been disoriented along the way. But God's purpose in this process is to bring us a whole new orientation. It's not to leave us there, but to bring us to a place of new orientation. I love Brigitte O'Hare in her book, Opening to Love. She talks about the journey from certainty via searching to intimacy. So, sort of we know something about God, and then there's a searching that takes place. And what is the end? Her thing is intimacy. It's the same as Clement of Alexandria said in the 2nd century. We would end up with love. So this is the process that God is wanting to take us through, and, kind of the transformed into love. There's something that God is doing in our lives, but there are walls in that place. So what happens during that time? And you might identify some of these things. So there's a guy called Alan Jamieson. Alan Jamieson's sort of a prominent New Zealand theologian, Baptist pastor. And he's written extensively on the stages and development of faith. He's written a couple of books, and he has some great illustrations of the way that this. He talks about the butterfly effect, I think he calls it, where sort of we start as a caterpillar, and before we know it, we go into this dark place that we don't really know what it is of the chrysalis, but we end up as butterflies. So you can read that in much greater detail. He also talks about off-road faith, where it's like, we're going on a faith journey, and it's like we're at tar-sealed road in a normal car, and then we all of a sudden find ourselves off-road and having to learn to drive in a four-wheel drive. And so this process of it, changes and develops and grows. And so he identifies some progressions, I suppose. He talks about the journey that we do from dependence to independence to interdependence. And if you think about that journey, it's a fantastic journey. So when we begin our Christian life, we're very dependent, aren't we? We're dependent on, so this is true, is it? Yes, okay, I believe it's true. And so, somebody who's, been around, been a Christian a long time, somebody who's, our mentor or leads us to faith or something like that. But then there's an inevitable and appropriate sort of independence. Well, I need to figure this stuff out for myself. But we don't stay in independence. The journey is to bring us to interdependence, which I think, what Tim and Jody in a whole different sense sort of talked about us being together with all of our nationalities and all of our, kind of subtleties and differences, makes us better as a whole. And so this is interdependence that God is leading us towards. What else he does? He says we go from answers accepted, he says, to searching and questioning, doubt and critique. And then the outworking of that is understanding and relishing the mystery, paradox, and wonder of God. This would describe something of my journey. I've just loved this sense of, I always think, I've been pastoring for 30 years. I feel like I knew more 30 years ago than I know now, which clearly is not true, but it was like I was more certain about it. But I can tell you, kind of with absolute open heart, I know Jesus more now than I knew Jesus 30 years ago. So I know less with my head now. I feel like I know less with my head now than I did 30 years ago, but I can tell you I know with my heart Jesus much more than I did 30 years ago. That's the journey that God's inviting us to. He says we go from serving God to relating to God to loving God. Do we ever stop serving God? No, of course. But we realize it's a relationship that we're invited to. He says we go from status quo to challenging the status quo to integrating into a larger canvas. And he's writing on this thing as being, this is a journey that God is taking us on, and this is a place or a destination that we are going to, and we're going to have to break through some barriers along that way. So Hagbig and Gerlich again say fundamentally it has to do with slowly breaking through the barriers we've built between our will and a newer awareness of God in our lives. So what are our options when we hit a wall? All of a sudden we've hit a wall. Well, I reckon there's probably three things that we can probably do. The first thing is we can abandon where we are. The second thing is we can double down on where we are. And the third thing is we can grow. And the third thing is a whole lot better than the first two things, in my opinion. So it's like, here's a wall, church, right? So church is amazing until it's not. Until it lets you down, or until, sort of somebody does something terrible. And the instinct is, I'm going to abandon it. Church is no good. Church is full of hypocrites. Church is full of, sort of, all they want is your money or something like that. And so it's like, I can do it without. That's a wall. And we can abandon it and say, well, I'm not going to do that. But a whole lot of better way is to grow. Is to recognize that as we, it's in its imperfection that we're going to discover some of these things. I think that's fair enough. Or we double down. Sometimes we double down on aspects of theology, I think. We believe in healing, right? So it's like, we're praying for healing and it doesn't happen. But I believe in healing, so I'm going to double down on it. So we've got to pray harder, we've got to work harder, we've got to have more faith, we've got to push harder. So we double down on something and we stay. We don't get the opportunity to go through that wall or to discover what is more and broad and beyond it. Or we get the third option is the option to grow. It's like, I can't figure this healing thing out. Because it's like sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't, and it seems to happen to the people who deserve it least and doesn't happen to the people who deserve it most. And I can't figure it out. But this is an opportunity for me to grow because I know that God is real and I know that He is good. And I know that there's something in here for me that I haven't yet figured out. It didn't work into my simplicity of the way I saw it before. But I'm not going to run and I'm not going to double down. I'm going to grow in this place. And I love Jacob's revelation in a sense when he said, surely the Lord is in this place and I was unaware of it. Sometimes, when we're in that really tough place, it's like the Lord is there, but we're unaware of it. We don't see it. He says, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So it's just this beautiful sort of sense. It's in that sort of wrestling time that we will discover something of God, I think. So what do we do when we hit the wall? What do we do? And some people here will be at the wall. And so what do we do? I have tried to come up with something really cool to say. I want my version of slip, slop, slap for this message. You all know slip, slop, slap. You remember it, you know what it means and stuff like that. I wanted stop, drop, and roll. You know what to do when we stop, drop, and roll. I wanted if it's strong, if it's long and strong, be gone. You know that one, tsunami. We should be aware of that. But I didn't come up with anything. I let myself down. I did a lot of work. I did a lot of kind of mind mapping, kind of writing. I came up with, but I think it's sort of mildly memorable, is we own it, we share it, and we live it. So this is what I want to think about. This is, kind of, I'm going to give you some things you could use this week if you'd like to. But when we hit a wall, what are you going to do when you next hit a wall? And I want to suggest that we own it, we share it, and we live it. What does that mean? Just sort of really quickly. Well, we own it, we recognize it, and we name it for what it is. I'm vulnerable at the moment. I'm hurting at the moment. God doesn't seem to be God at the moment. We own it. And we dig into the well of what we know. Because in those dark times, that sometimes is all we've got. And I've seen God before, and my foundations are in God, and I'm going to hang in to this God because I know who He is. We own it, and we accept that a good God is going to be in it and with us and for us in that process. And so our friends Hagberg and Gulick say, experience the wall is both frightening and unpredictable. So we're not saying, kind of let's sort of, celebrate, because it's hard. For some, it requires a lengthy time. We have to take the thick wall apart piece by piece. Others move through it rather quickly. Don't you hate those people? It's like, there they go. They don't care. Others move through it quickly. Others will encounter the wall repeatedly at different levels at different times. But if we know what it is and we own it, I'm going to own the fact that this is where I'm at. I think it might be a really helpful thing to do. And then I think we share it. I think this is really important. I think we have just this incredible tendency to isolate when we're in difficult places. As I reflect back on 2001, and it wasn't because of a message, it was sort of, I don't know if it was just plain stubbornness, but I go to this home group every week. It was one of the more boring home groups I've been to be really honest. But there was something about just living it, and I mean, in my memory, I just sat on the floor that whole year in the dark, but with people who are around me, and that sharing it made all the difference, changed everything along the way. And so that's why church is important. It's not because, kind of they're all, I love the songs, or, kind of I think the series is just for me or whatever. It's like life. So we're known and noticed. Those things are really important. So we share it, sort of we find somebody, or we find places that we can share. Proverbs says, he who walks with the wise grows wise. This is not a sharing as in, sort of, we find someone to complain with and sort of, sort of, I'm deconstructing my faith. So it's like, yeah, well, I'm deconstructing my faith too. It's like, let's all deconstruct our faith together and sort of, and not do it. We're looking for wisdom. We're looking for those who will walk this journey with us and will be strong. So we've talked a little bit about the Celtic Christians in this series, because thin places is a Celtic term. And so the Celtic sort of church over centuries had a word called anamkara, and anamkara essentially meant soul friend, or friend of my soul, or guide in some ways. And so, yeah, even one of the abbesses, I think would be the word, Bridget, she said, a person without a soul friend is like a body without a head. It's like, if we're doing it on our own, then we can't. It's like a body without a head, which, clearly is not viable. And so what are we looking for? If we were to share it, I think we're looking for someone who listens, He really listens to us and listens to God. This is not a casual thing. Someone who's compassionate and non-critical. Someone who's safe. Someone who's trustworthy, confidential is really significant. Someone who's spiritually mature. I mean, so it's like not somebody who's looking for someone who's perfect, but someone who's serious about their life with Jesus. Someone who's biblically literate. Someone who's humble and aware that it's the Holy Spirit that will be working in our lives as we're in this wall moment, or maybe period, long period, whatever it is. The soul friend, the Anam Cara for the Celts was not someone who gives advice or someone who knows it all or someone who's an expert, but it's someone who helps another listen to the voice of God along the way. Does more listening than talking, does more praying than talking. Those sorts of people. So in our congregation, we have at least 4 spiritual directors, people who've trained even in that. So Nikki Bull is one, Sandy is another, Fran, my wife, and I, we've trained as spiritual directors. So there's almost a minute. Well, there is a ministry, just in terms of that. But you'll have people in your lives, and I mean, in your notes. One of the reasons I do spiritual direction with quite a lot of pastors, and they quite often say to me, should I go to spiritual direction or supervision? And I always say to them, I would choose spiritual direction first. And the reason for this is a supervisor will never ask you about what your life with Jesus is like. And so you can get a whole lot of things that you can get in supervision through books and seminars and conferences and things like that, and peer relationships, which is all fantastic and important. But the only person who will ask you, how are you and Jesus going, is a spiritual director in that context. But my invitation to us as a church is to find within our relationships a deeper, and whether that's sort of, spouses or loved ones, or whether it's sort of someone outside of that, but to find somebody that we can begin to talk about our relationship with Jesus. As opposed to, I come to church and I'm a Christian and I read the Bible every now and then or whatever. But to begin to grow in that. So we share it. Surely that's a good thing, to share our walk of faith and along the way. And then we live it. We embrace it. We don't fear it anymore. It doesn't feel good, but there's something bigger. There is God is good in this. And so we're not throwing the toys out of the cot kind of thing, but we're determined to be with God in this journey that we have, we face at the moment. The righteous, it says, run into the name of the Lord. I think that's really important. When we hit the wall, don't run away from the name of the Lord. Run into the name of the Lord, and he will have something for you there. Hagberg and Gulick again. Once we believe that God is in the midst of the darkness with us, it can be a transforming place. We don't necessarily get cured or erase our pain or become saints. I think this is really important because, we're so transactional sometimes. It's like, well, if I'm a really good boy or girl, then it's all going to get better. It may not. But we'll meet God. We don't necessarily get cured or erase our pain or become saints, but we learn how to embrace our pain, how to stay with it and learn what it's trying to teach us, how to look fear in the face and keep moving into it. The wall invites us each to heal, which is a beautiful thing. Final quote. Excuse me a minute. I forgot my sermon aid. So there's a lady called Julian of Norwich, and she's pretty famous. We've quoted her a few times. So she was an anchoress, in the 13th century in England and Norwich. And she actually, it seems bizarre, but she got built into the side of the church, and she prayed, and it's an amazing story. And she was she's the first female English author. And she had visions of God, and she spent 20 years figuring out what the visions meant. And Julian of Norwich, there's a really famous saying of hers, which I think is really important and maybe important for somebody here today. And that it seems to transcend all of the centuries. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. So Fran and I were at Norwich, and I even bought the cup. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And every morning, Fran and I have coffee in bed in these cups. And I get it, and most mornings I go and I give it to her, and I say, Fran, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. This, it may be a great day, it may be the worst day, but I know that God is with me in that day. So bless you as you face your walls. May you face them, not run from them, not abandon or not, double down or not even stay the other side of them, but see them as a God invitation to grow and to know him in a whole new and different way. I think that's really important.